sets it a little bit to the left. 11 yards shy of the record. Williams breaks a hole. Williams had a record book. Ricky Williams runs to the Hall of Fame. Touchdown. Ricky Williams, touchdown.
Young from the shotgun. Back to throw. Vince looks. Under pressure. He'll tuck it in run. Vince to the 5. Young. Touchdown Texas. Touchdown Vince Young. He's done it again. Vince Young has given the Longhorns the lead with 19 seconds to play in the game.
Longhorn Nation, we're back.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Lone Star Lowdown podcast. My name is Matt Galatzan and I will be your host. And today I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and colleague over at Texas Longhorns on SI, Zach Dimmitt. Zach, how's it going?
It's going good. We're going to talk some basketball today, so I'm always excited about that. But yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Spring football's over, so we're kind of entering that part of the long off season where we're going to have to find some extra things to talk about, and maybe have a little bit of fun with some other things. But Texas is also very active in the transfer portal market in basketball. It's been a project by Sean Miller, coming in kind of late in the process after the tournament had already started. Some players had already entered the portal and made their decisions before he even got control of the program. So he was a little bit behind early. I think he did a pretty good job of, going out and attacking some of these needs that he had. He did a good job at player retention. And as a result, I think the Longhorns are in a pretty good position heading into next year. On3 recently came out, and this is going to be the topic of our first discussion here. On3 recently came out ranking the transfer portal additions in so far this offseason. I'm going to let Zach explain a little bit about how that it all comes together. But Texas is very high up on that ranking. Yesterday they were number 1. I think today they're number 2 now. You said.
Yeah, and if you're able to get that on screen, that'd be great. I don't know if it's going to let me, but
yeah, let me work on that.
So yeah, basically, it's not your typical transfer portal rankings. On3 actually did a pretty interesting thing here. They're ranking teams based on overall transfer portal activity, and that accounts transfers that are leaving and transfers that are coming in. And so Kentucky's number 1, and Texas is number 2, and so that's pretty. It's pretty impressive when you consider that On3 is factoring in who Texas lost in the transfer portal and who Texas is bringing in. Granted, that doesn't include the loss of Trey Johnson because obviously he went to the NBA draft. So, Texas lost 3 to the portal: Jamie Vincent, Malik Presley, and Devon Pryor. And I would say Devon Pryor was by far the most impactful of those 3. But overall, that group losing those 3 is not too significant to Texas's roster, considering who they brought in. Camden Heide, Texas just announced that they just signed Camden Heide, and then Xavier transferred Galen Swain as well. And then you got a FAU transfer, Matas Vogititis, Lacina Traore, and the last one, they just got Simeon Wilcher from St. John's. So when you compare the transfers in to the transfers out, that's what leads to this ranking according to On3. And so I think it's pretty interesting. It says a lot about what Sean Miller was able to do overall when it came to retaining the roster. You're not losing a valuable guy like Kendall Weaver to the portal. Tremont Mark, he had 1 year left, could have opted to transfer elsewhere. Same with Jordan Pope. So, these rankings are definitely interesting. If you want to look for more of a direct ranking of what Texas was able to do in the portal, this really isn't it. This is more of an overall when factoring people that left as well. But definitely a big asterisk that this doesn't include Trey Johnson, who went to the NBA draft. But still, Sean Miller was able to retain really important names that Texas needed if they wanted to have a serviceable roster for next season. So I just think it's pretty interesting to see them in the company of Kentucky, Michigan, and Tennessee at 5. Washington's kind of little wild card there. Huskies haven't been too great over the past few seasons, so interesting to see that as well. But yeah, I just thought it was something that we could talk about to get a picture of what Sean Miller has done overall, not just bringing guys in, but retaining guys, and then also only losing a few pieces.
Yeah, and obviously, Texas isn't necessarily done in the transfer portal either. They could always go out and find another shooter or another guard somewhere. All the stuff about PJ Haggerty that surfaced over the last couple of days is largely not relevant to Texas. I tend to believe that was sort of a leverage play to try and get some additional NIL for himself and maybe put some pressure on some other programs to make a move. I know he's a Texas native and all those things, but at the same time, it's unrealistic to expect Texas to spend $4 million on a player like that. So if Texas, and don't get me wrong, he's a phenomenal talent and all those things, but Texas, I just don't think is going to pony up $4 million for anybody unless it was, LeBron James 2.0 and he was the best player in America. So I think that, Texas could still make a couple of additions here and there. I expect those to be either of the international variety or the recruiting variety. There's still a couple things they need to add to this roster in terms of the future rather than just the now as well. They need to find a future point guard. They need to find a future developmental big man that they can, be around for a couple years here. Zach, you have any intel on some of the things they might be looking at or anything like that?
It's been kind of quiet. There hasn't been tons on that end when it comes to Texas transfer portal news, but you got to imagine that an international guy could be a top target, regardless of who that is. But someone that's a developmental piece that's young. We've already seen Texas be in the mix reportedly for two of those guys in the past couple of weeks. So, but yeah, I think any big spending that they have done has probably already happened. I don't see any, major names coming in. It was worth mentioning about a week or so ago. I actually, reported on this on my Twitter or X, I should say. Chris Del Conte had reacted to a post from a college basketball account that stated Texas was, less than 8 million. Texas basketball had less than 8 million for NIL spending, and Chris Del Conte responded to the overall post, which included information about other teams, and he responded with was a GIF of Donald Trump saying that's fake news, and so it kind of caught my eye that he was essentially saying no, Texas potentially could have more, is what he was hinting at. It was just a GIF. He wasn't saying anything directly, but he was strongly hinting that he the information presented about Texas having less than 8 million for NIL for basketball was not true. I thought that was pretty interesting, and he quickly deleted the tweet. So that just shows that they are on the right path when it comes to NIL, and they have future spending that they didn't have under Rodney Terry, and so next year's roster could look a lot different when it comes to landing some really big names. We'll see how that goes. But for this year, this offseason, they didn't really land any big star power guys, and that's perfectly fine because I mentioned before, we saw that with the 2023 Elite Eight squad. There wasn't really any big stars. You had guys like Serge Rice coming in. Not a lot of people knew about him, come from New Mexico State, and he just takes over the program, and they wouldn't have gone on that run without him. You can say the same about Timmy Allen, Marcus Carr. Marcus Carr was really the only big name, I would say, that Texas got out of the portal whenever Chris Beard was head coach. But yeah, I think that it's been a good offseason so far, and there's a lot of positives to look forward to next year. But yeah, the NIL number for basketball definitely kind of caught my eye. Who knows what Chris Del Conte was hinting at, but it certainly seemed like he was hinting at, the 8 million number being maybe a little more, but we'll see. Who knows?
Yeah, and I think that this offseason for Texas was more about, player retention and continuity and establishing a culture and being competitive, to a degree, and setting yourself up for the future rather than, going out and taking big swings and spending a bunch of money that, you didn't necessarily have to assemble a roster to compete immediately. I think that that's going to be their focus next offseason, and they just wanted to kind of establish a baseline this offseason and still get some good players and still be a competitive team, but not necessarily, spend all their, put all their cards on the table for everything right away, and that they're in this thing for the long term. It's not a short term gratification kind of thing. Sean Miller's trying to establish a program here, not a 1 year wonder. So I think it's a good move. It's still going to be an exciting brand of basketball for fans to come in and watch. They're going to run and gun. They're going to play a lot of transition. They're going to play good defense. They're going to be an exciting team to watch. It's going to be a much different looking offense than what Rodney Terry had going here, which was, largely ineffective and kind of, and some of that was due to injury, but, there wasn't a lot of continuity, and it was a lot of ISO ball and give the ball to Trey Johnson and everybody else get out of the way. Tremone Mark playing a little bit too much hero ball. I think all that's going to change here under Sean Miller, and you're going to see a much more exciting brand of basketball. And people, experts still believe that Texas is going to have a pretty solid team next year, which is what we're going to get into next. The NCAA tournament just ended, about a little over a month ago, and it's interesting because, it's kind of like the NFL draft, where as soon as the NFL draft's over, people are already putting out 2026 mocks, and there's not really any way to tell how all this is going to come together. It's just, it's just projection. It's just, nobody really knows. But Joe Lunardi, the foremost expert on bracketology, and figuring out which teams are in the NCAA tournament, released his way too early projections for the 2026 bracketology. And he has Texas in a very interesting spot, and I'm going to pull that up here. He has Texas as an 8 seed in the tournament going into next year, which is higher than I would have had. I would have had them as a bubble team just because without Trey Johnson in there, I don't know, I'm having a hard time seeing this team keeping up offensively in the SEC without any really elite shooters on the outside or anything like that. But here I'll bring up Lunardi's projections here, that he has Texas in the East region as an 8 seed here with alongside Baylor, Texas Tech, Alabama, Memphis, Arizona, North Carolina, UConn. It's a pretty tough bracket. I can't. Hold on. The number 1 seed is covered by our watermark
Duke.
there. It's Duke. Okay, yeah, but you got St. John's on the other side, Georgia, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Florida, defending national champs, Mississippi State. So he's still got a lot of SEC teams in there. Zach, why don't you kind of dive into this and tell us what you think about these projections?
Yeah, like you were saying about projecting the NFL drafts and projecting what NFL teams can do a year out is a lot easier, in my opinion, than college basketball, because college basketball predictions a year out when some of these teams still are incomplete is just sometimes impossible, because this tournament, you just never know what's going to happen. You never know who's going to get in, who's going to have a down year. And so projecting the seeds is definitely bold by Lunardi, but it's something he's always done and definitely is interesting for sure. But yeah, Texas and Baylor in the 8-9. Baylor, I believe, was just an 8 seed this past tournament when they beat Mississippi State. And if Texas ends up in that range next year, I think that fans can feel good about what Sean Miller did in year one, because if Texas is an 8 seed, that means that they did pretty solid in the SEC at regular season. You kind of want to avoid the 8-9, because if you can get the 7 potentially, or even you could even argue the 11 seed somehow is a better path, because you want to avoid that 1 seed. But an 8 seed would say a lot about what the team did in year one without a vast majority of the roster from year before. And having that little rivalry matchup with Baylor would be kind of nice in the first round. If Texas upsets Duke, you face Texas Tech, another rival down the line potentially. Obviously, who knows what will happen, but yeah, I think if, in my opinion, I thought that Texas actually had a chance if they beat Xavier in the first four as an 11 seed, that they had a decent path, you know, to make it maybe to the second weekend. But yeah, that's when you get the 8-9 game, you're in trouble of getting eliminated pretty quickly by that one seed, and we saw how dominant the one seeds were this year. So, but that's beside the point. I think that's definitely realistic for Texas, and to have a balanced roster that has some intriguing pieces. But it all depends on injuries and how it all comes together. As we saw this past season, injuries were a pretty big storyline for sure. You never want to use injuries as an excuse, but there was definitely some significant injuries that the team had to go through, and that affected team chemistry. It's not that guys don't like each other. It's just on the court chemistry, it takes some time to get used to, and so we saw the absence of Kendall Weaver kind of playing a big part in how the team played this past season. So if he's able to be healthy, Lucien Traore had the knee injury. If he's able to be healthy for a full year after being away from basketball, he didn't play for Xavier this entire past season. So seeing how he can do, I think that an 8 seed would be a success for Sean Miller, but if you can get that up to a 7 seed or even more, it would just be exceeding expectations for year one for sure.
Yeah, and then diving into this bracketology a little bit more, you can tell it's going to be it's really going to be another tough year in the SEC. Lenardi has 13 teams from the SEC making the tournament. I'll kind of go through the list here real quick. We got Oklahoma, Auburn, Missouri, Kentucky in one region, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Tennessee in another. Then you got Texas, Alabama, and in another region. Then you got Mississippi State, Florida, Ole Miss in a play-in, Georgia, and then in his first four out, he has Texas A&M. His last four in, like I mentioned, he has Ole Miss. So a lot of SEC teams in there once again. So it's going to be a real tough year for Texas regardless, because the SEC is so deep and so talented. So I guess what I want to ask you next, Zach, before we get into our next topic here, just real quick, is what kind of season does Texas have to have in the SEC to live up to this number 8 seed, or even really just make the tournament? Because as we saw this last year, SEC was by far the best conference in college basketball, the most tournament bids ever in an NCAA tournament in college basketball history from the SEC. I believe they had 14 teams out of 16 that made the tournament, which is just crazy. What do you think they have to do next year to actually make the tournament in terms of like record, wins, whatever the case may be?
Yeah, if the rest, obviously depends on if the rest of the conference lives up to what we all expect of it. But 6-12 again next year, barely squeaking into the play-in, or the first four, I should say. That's just not going to do it 2 years in a row. It was already so unlikely for Texas, in the first place. But they had enough big wins that it pushed them in, and I just don't think that they can afford that. 6-12 is not going to cut it. You got to get at least 500, 9-9. I think 9-9 is what they were at in the Big 12 in 2020, the 23-24 season, when they lost to Tennessee in the second round. I think they were 9-9 in the Big 12. So just getting to 500 in the SEC, that'll do a lot. Arkansas, I'm looking at the standings right now. Arkansas was 8-10 in the SEC, but yet they were right there on the cusp of beating Texas Tech before blowing that lead. And so, you can still be a great team if you're right there in the middle of the pack of the SEC, but Texas has finished third to last in the SEC. Only LSU and South Carolina, both who didn't make the tournament. The only two SEC teams to not make the tournament were the only two teams that finished below Texas. Um, that is not a good look for Rodney Terry's squad this past year, and they still somehow made it into the first four. So you can't be treading that line again if you're Sean Miller. Teams like Texas Tech, you wonder how they're going to perform with Bucky McMillan. I actually like the moves that they've been making.
Texas A&M.
Did I say Texas Tech?
Yeah.
Texas A&M. Sorry about that. Texas A&M with Bucky McMillan, they've been making some good moves. But you wonder how that's going to be in year one. Does A&M fall down the standings a little bit? You got to imagine that Florida, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, all those teams are still going to be elite. But Texas, if they can kind of squeak up there, surpass some of the teams that were ahead of them, you can't be 6-12 and finish below both your rivals, Oklahoma and A&M. So I know that they got 3 combined wins against those teams this season, but it just can't happen again. If they make the tournament somehow next year with that record in the SEC, that means that they're going to have a ton of big non-con wins and tons of big wins in conference. So we'll see how it goes, but yeah, you just 500 or better. You're locking yourself in. But like we saw, 4, 8, and 10 teams from the SEC comfortably made it into the tournament. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and I think basically what Zach's trying to get at here too, just to kind of simplify it a little bit, they have to be somewhere up in the middle of the pack. The SEC. You don't need to be in the top half, top 6 or whatever. But if you're somewhere in that, 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 range in the SEC, that's going to propel you to a pretty high seed in the SEC tournament. Because we saw with Arkansas, they were, like you said, they were 8 and 10 in the regular season. They end up being like an 8 or 9 seed, I believe. Was that correct? In the or were they 11 10 seeds? Sorry. 10. So yeah, but right in that range, and that's kind of what got them into the tournament. I think that the ticket to getting this 8 seed is probably a 500 record in the SEC or something close to it if you can get there. So we'll see if Texas can get there. I have some doubts about how they're going to be able to compete in against certain teams in the SEC. I think they're going to be very good in the non-conference, depending on what that schedule ends up looking like. I know they're going to, Chris Del Conte is not afraid of putting some big games on that schedule in the non-conference. So we'll see how that all works out. I wonder if he might take a different approach this year to kind of help Sean Miller get his sea legs under him in his first year. But they typically schedule some big dogs there in the non-conference. So we'll see how that all works out.
Yeah, something I wanted to add really quick when you talk about the non-con. Texas was really weak in non-conference this past season, only like UConn, and they had their early season tournament with Syracuse and St. Joe's. That didn't really do it for them. They were potentially going to play Texas Tech. We'll see how that goes. But they played the Maui Invitational in November in Hawaii, and you got Arizona State, Boise State, Chaminade is Division II, NC State, Seton Hall. Both were very bad teams this past year. Texas, USC, and Washington State. So those are the potentially teams that they could play in that tournament in November as part of their non-conference, and that's not a very strong field. So CDC is going to need to schedule some pretty big names. Potentially UConn again in stores could be an option, but that field is not super strong, and so I think the Texas is going to need to schedule some bigger boys in some of their other non-conference games before they head to the SEC. Just wanted to add that.
And that schedule will come out here in the next few months. It's not like football where you have your entire schedule set, a year ahead of time. So we'll see how that all plays out. Let's change gears now. Let's move back to the NFL draft here for a bit. Obviously, as we talked about, earlier this week and yesterday, 12 Longhorns end up getting drafted in the NFL draft. Four more sign undrafted free agent contracts. A couple guys go undrafted. Isaiah Bond was one of those. We'll see where he ends up heading if his legal situation straightens out. But 12 Longhorns go in the 7 rounds of the NFL draft. There are some guys who entered some very, very good situations going into their rookie year. So Zach and I are each going to list our 3 guys that we think could shine as rookies from the Longhorns. I'll start with mine. The first one I have is Jahdae Barron. Obviously first round pick, you expect him to be a starter and perform pretty well. But I think that just because of the defense that he's entering, with the way that they play schematically, playing a lot of zone defense, and his skill sets in the zone, he was the number one corner in college football last year in zone coverage. He goes to a secondary that's very talented already, in a defense that has an excellent pass rush. They're going to be one of the top defenses in the NFL, so I expect him to have a big rookie season. The coaching staff obviously loves him. He set a pretty good precedent with when he was drafted by asking everybody in the room to be on speakerphone so he could talk to the whole organization as a collective. So he's already heading in there with some brownie points there. Great kid, hard worker. I think he's going to have a really big year in Denver.
I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, I agree with you on that when it comes to Jahdae especially. But I can list my three if you're ready.
Well, let's just go one by one. So you just give me your first one.
First one, yeah, Matthew Golden. I think that's a no-doubter. Just because of the receiving core that Green Bay already has, it's talented, but I think he can push for that wide receiver one role as a rookie. Jaden Reed is still super, super good for them when it comes to doing a little bit of everything. They run him on a lot of jet sweeps and gets a lot of carries, but I think Matthew Golden is as a pure receiver. I think that he can step in and be the number one guy. Christian Watson's had some problems with injuries and hands, and so I think Matthew Golden, if he can prove himself right away, I predict he's going to have a few clutch moments early on in his rookie season, and I think he'll definitely earn the love of the passionate Green Bay fan base pretty quick, and he can step into that wide receiver one role. But then after that, we kind of talked about this briefly. I'd go Gunnar Helm with the Tennessee Titans, just because they have a whole new offense, and so there's going to be some opportunities for new guys to step up. And they don't really have a star tight end. Chigga Okonkwo's pretty solid for them, but I think Gunnar Helm can step in and be a decent contributor by season's end. May start out a little bit slower for Tennessee, but Cam Ward's going to need some of those off-schedule throws. I know they just got Tyler Lockett, 2 receivers in the draft, but Gunnar Helm, he's going to be overlooked probably by some defenses at first, and that can allow him some room to, step in and be a good target for Cam Ward and potentially be their leading tight end by the end of the season.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And how do you pronounce that guy's name? Chigga
Okonkwo.
Chigga Okonkwo. He's on the last year of his rookie deal, so that'll also give Helm some opportunities, I think, to shine as the year goes on. Because if he has a big year, then he could kind of give them the confidence to move forward and have him as the starter, and not necessarily have to re-sign a guy who's been up and down throughout his rookie career there in Tennessee. I like that pick, Zach. That's a good one. Next one on my list, obviously, it's kind of another obvious one. It's Kelvin Banks. He's going to come in and start right away, I believe, at left tackle, be a part of that new Kellen Moore offense. It's probably going to start Tyler Shuck at quarterback. He's going to be the anchor of that offensive line. I think he has a chance to be like an all-rookie type player there. You look across the draft, and draft grades don't really mean much in the grand scheme of things, but if you look across the NFL experts like Dane Brugler, Pete Prisco, Daniel Jeremiah, those kind of guys, they're all saying that Kelvin Banks was their favorite pick for the Saints in the entire draft, and there's a reason for that. I think he's going to be a stalwart in the NFL for a long time. He's going to have a great rookie season, and he's going to prove some of the doubters wrong, because in the pre-draft process, he was kind of projected as a late first-round pick throughout the last couple of months, and then he vaulted back up. I think because people actually started watching his tape and realized he's a really damn good player. But whatever the case may be, I think he's going to have a really good year for the Saints.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to imagine that he doesn't produce as a rookie. Maybe we're a little bit biased with that, but I think that Kelvin just carries himself so well. He's a leader on and off the field. He's such a humble guy too, and that carries over. Or I should say, you wouldn't think it doesn't seem like it carries over because he's ferocious when he's on the field. And so I think he's going to have a great year for them. Um, and being close to home definitely probably adds a little bit of that motivation. Only being short drive away in New Orleans. I mean, I shouldn't say short, but in comparison to how far we had to drive in Texas, sometimes it's not that far. So, but yeah, for my last one, I was thinking about doing Quinn as my last pick, but I'm gonna go with Andrew Makuba. It could go a few ways for him as a rookie. He could uh, not produce as much, have a quiet year, and sit behind some of the other guys that have in that secondary, or I think he could break out and do really well. I just think that the Eagles have done a really good job building a secondary that's elite, and I think Makuba could benefit from that. He's already in a secondary that we saw Cooper DeJean, Quinion Mitchell had some big moments for them down the stretch of last season when they won the Super Bowl. But Sidney Brown, safety, I know he's coming off the injury. Could Makuba step in potentially if Sidney Brown is still working his way back and potentially make an impact in that secondary? Still got Reed Blankenship, the veteran, but he's going to be an unrestricted free agent next offseason. So, is he going to play well in his contract year, or is Makuba going to step in for him? And or potentially maybe the Eagles trade Blankenship at midseason and allows Makuba to step in and get some more action since Blankenship's going to be on the back end of his deal. So it could go a few ways. It's hard to make these predictions this far out. You don't know how training camp has gone quite yet. Because we're still a little bit away from that. But I think Andrew Makuba, we saw what he did coming to Texas this past offseason and immediately contributing. It's hard to put it past him that he could do the same as a rookie with Philly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good shout as well. I like Andrew Makuba's situation there in Philly. They draft extremely well, and they seem to hit on nearly all of their draft picks, so I don't expect Makuba to be an exception to that. My last pick is Jaden Blue. Fifth-round picks usually don't carry a whole lot of fanfare when it comes to the NFL draft. There's a little bit more questions on how much they can contribute early, depending on the position. I think Jaden Blue is entering a situation where he'll have a chance to contribute early. We mentioned yesterday, and we were talking about him. A lot of people see him as this boutique back who's all about speed and receptions out of the backfield. Jashard Choice came out and said that he can do it all yesterday. He's strong enough to bounce off tacklers and run between the tackles if you ask him to do it. And that he compares very favorably, skill set wise to a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit, who, also entered as a guy who many thought was just kind of a scat back. And he turned into one of the best running backs in the NFL in his second year in the league. So those are lofty expectations for Jaden. I think that he's going to have to work his way up to earn that sort of expectation and that kind of, and that kind of trust with the Cowboys. But I think he'll have a really good opportunity to do it. He's bigger than he gets credit for. 6 foot, 200 pounds. That's about the same size as Gibbs. He also compares pretty well to a guy like Tony Pollard, who was a good running back for the Cowboys and is now with the Tennessee Titans. I expect by season's end, he'll be, I think that he'll start off the season probably in the rotation. And then by season's end, he'll be, a very reliable part of that group, probably the number one or the number two running back, as they're pushing late into the season. And he'll also, they'll use him in a variety of ways. They're going to use him in the run game on jet sweeps and things like that too. They'll use him in the receiving game. They might use him a little bit on special teams. He'll be everywhere because he's an explosive guy, and anytime he gets the ball in his hands, he can take it to the house. So I expect him to fit in really well with that new Brian Schottenheimer offense. And with Clayton Adams as the offensive coordinator, they really are going to focus on running the ball as well. So he'll have a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, I think definitely by season's end, number 2 running back is, not out of the question at all. Miles Sanders, he's a little bit older at this point in his career. Interesting signing by the Cowboys, but he really fell out of the rotation at times with Carolina this past season, and so we'll see if he can kind of rejuvenate his career. But if he doesn't, Jaden Blue can step in and be that guy. Right? I think Javonte Williams will actually be really good for them for Dallas. But I think Jaden Blue, if he steps right into that number 2 role, and then you never know, Javonte Williams, knock on wood, don't want to see it happen again, but he did tear his ACL about a year ago. And, injuries happen, and you never want to see a guy get re-injured, but that's the risk that you run. And so Jaden Blue could potentially see some more action than expected, depending on injury. You never hope it goes that way, but that's how the game is, especially when you're a running back. So I think he could definitely have some big moments as a rookie. I don't think it'll be a Deuce Vaughn situation where we now have seen Deuce Vaughn be relegated to probably the 5th string running back for Dallas when you add in Phil Maffa as well from Clemson. So I don't see that happening with Jaden Blue. I think Deuce Vaughn was a good college player and just didn't work out for him. But yeah, I think it'll be a strong rookie season for him.
Yeah, and they already parted ways with Malik Davis, so that path got a little bit clearer yesterday. So, we'll see. We'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk some more NFL draft, maybe get into a little bit of Quinn stuff. And then we'll also talk about our projections for the Texas football team next year. We'll kind of go through their schedule, pick what we think is going to happen there, maybe make a little college football playoff prediction as well tomorrow morning. But we'll call it there. We'll come back tomorrow. That's going to do it for another edition of the Lone Star Lowdown podcast. You can listen to us pretty much on every major podcast platform out there. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pocket Casts, and more. If there's one that we're not on that you like to use, let us know. We'll get on there as soon as we can. We're also live on X, Facebook, and YouTube daily, so you can catch us there as well. And don't forget to check out Texas Longhorns on SI for all your latest news and notes regarding Texas Longhorn sports. If you enjoyed the podcast here today, make sure to hit the like button and the sub button on your favorite platform. But most importantly, be sure to tell somebody you love them, and we will catch you on the next one.
Fight.